Danske banko vyriausiasis analitikas Larsas Christensenas sako, kad Lietuvoje diskusija apie progresinius mokesčius užvirė nelaiku. Nors Danija, kurioje gyvena ir dirba šis ekonomistas, garsėja itin dideliais progresiniais mokesčiais, tai nėra sektinas pavyzdys Lietuvai. Pasak Christenseno, progresiniai mokesčiai patraukliai skamba tik politikams, tačiau jų nesiūlytų nei vienas šiuolaikinis ekonomistas, kuris įžvelgtų daugiau neigiamų negu teigiamų aspektų.
So, good morning once again.
Good morning. Can you see the IQ there? That's important.
As we talk about progressive taxation,
Yeah.
and we have quite hot discussions presently now in Lithuania about progressive
Yeah.
taxation. Do you think Lithuania needs progressive taxes?
No, certainly not. I think that in my view, the discussions about progressive taxation in Lithuania is somewhat misplaced. I can understand the fact that certain politicians think that the rich should contribute to ensuring better public finances in the same way as many low-paid, unskilled workers have done, and how pensioners have contributed. I can have a full understanding of that, and that I want to stress. That it's not an issue about whether this is social justice or not. That's not. For me, it's just a question: is progressive taxation a good way to ensure redistribution of income or not?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it is. I think that progressive taxation has a numerous negative impacts. First of all, if we look at it, I doubt it will bring in much revenue. We have already in Lithuania significant problems with a black economy, a black market economy, people not paying taxes. And we know that the people that already is not paying in taxes because they are cheating the system, so to speak, they will also find a way out of this. The people who will, on the other hand, have to pay progressive taxation were people that took education, got skilled, became engineers, economists, accountants, and got a good salary down the road. Having progressive taxation in that sense is taxing education. If I take education so I can make a better living, that is being taxed by progressive taxation. So progressive taxation is a tax on education. It's also a tax on mobility. If I move from one part of the country to another part of the country to get a better job, I'll get taxed more. So it's a tax on mobility and flexibility in the labor market. And then obviously it's a negative signal to send to international investors that will find Lithuania less attractive as a country to invest in. And we desperately need in this country to attract foreign investment. And then, of course, there is an issue saying, yeah, but you have that in Scandinavia. We have progressive taxation in Denmark. But I think that if we look at Scandinavia, I think that if you look at the trend in Scandinavia, in all the Scandinavian countries, all the Nordic countries, the trend over the last 20 years has been to reduce progressive taxation rather than to increase it. In Sweden, they have basically gotten rid of progressive taxation. In Denmark, we still have high progressive taxation. But I would stress very much that the highest income brackets in Denmark, even though we pay very high taxes in that, the revenue generated from our progressive taxation is very small. And it's widely debated in Denmark among economists. And I don't think we find many mainstream economists who think that our progressive taxation in Denmark has been successful in terms of generating revenue. It's a political decision that you want it or not. But from a textbook economic perspective, you can't find any textbook that would say progressive taxation is the way forward. And I think another issue here is, do you want progressive taxation to punish the rich or to help the poor? If you want to help the poor, make sure that that there is free access to education. Make sure that if you get into trouble, you get social benefits, but don't try to punish those who are working harder or investing or taking education or being more mobile. And I think you do that with higher progressive taxation. So yes, there's a lot of positive things to say about Scandinavia, but high progressive taxation and high income tax in general is certainly not something that you can in general be proud of. Well, we are proud of in Scandinavia that we have social cohesion in the sense that everybody feel part of society, and it's rather homogeneous societies. Would that exist even if we got rid of progressive taxation in Denmark, on Sweden, on Finland, and Norway? Yes, I think so. But again, I would again stress the trend in the Scandinavian countries over the last 20 years has been through every tax reform to reduce progressive taxation rather than doing the same. We did it in Denmark a couple of years ago. We did tax reform, significant tax reform, by the way, by a social democratic government back in 93 that significantly reduced that. The Swedish government has done the same thing. So, you know, if you want to look for the Scandinavian countries in terms of discussion of progressive taxation, it's a move away from progressive taxation rather towards progressive taxation.
You also mentioned that progressive taxes won't create a welfare state, so...
No, and what is a welfare state? You know, I think that...
when it's pointing at Denmark.
Yes, well...
This is a welfare state.
Yeah, but, you know, the point is now Denmark is struggling with you know, fiscal issues that we are having to tackle. There's a wide disagreement, a wide agreement in Denmark that we need to do significant fiscal reforms in Denmark in the coming years because we have been spending too much in public finances. We have a very generous welfare state in Denmark, and so is the case in Sweden and Norway. But I will also stress that Denmark did not introduce the general concept of welfare state before the early 70s and late 60s, at a point where Denmark and Sweden, Norway already had become rather wealthy nations. So you can introduce the welfare state when you can afford it. And I hardly think that Lithuania is in a situation to have the general welfare state mechanism. There are things that can be learned from the Scandinavian countries, but those I think is more related to cutting, for example, red tape, making the bureaucracy more transparent, because the public sector is rather efficient in the Scandinavian countries. We have done significant labor market reforms in both Denmark and Sweden in recent years. These things that can be learned from the Scandinavian countries, but it's not just copying the model. I think that's not a development strategy that would work.
When did you have progressive taxation introduced in Denmark?
Well, progressive taxation in Denmark has been, you know, long ago. We had income taxation introduced already nearly 100 years ago, or more than 100 years ago now. And progressive taxation was introduced in that system relatively early on. But you know, again, what is progressive taxation? If let's say you have a flat tax of 70%, well, nobody would work. But if you have a progressive taxation where you have one rate of 1% and another rate of 5%, well, that would be a rather nice system. You know, so I think that, you know, one thing is how progressive it is, and another, of course, is the tax level. And in Denmark, we both have a progressive and a very high tax environment. You know, when I buy a car, I have to pay for 3. You know, when I buy gasoline, you know, I pay nearly €2 per liter of gasoline. So because of taxation, and then I pay very, very high income taxes. That is possible because the Danish economy is extremely efficient, has become rather affluent. But if you impose that kind of taxation levels on an economy like the Lithuanian, you know, there will be no economic development at all.
There's the last topic I wanted to ask you about a famous debate of 2 prominent Lithuanian economists.
Yeah.
One of them, Gitanas Nausėda, saying that Lithuanians earn low wages because the productivity is low at 4 to 6 times than in the European Union. And another of them being Romas Ladutka, professor of Vilnius University, and he's saying that the productivity is actually not so low. Business won't share their revenue with the employees.
Well, I think that
so what is the reason why Lithuanians?
Well, I you know, when I hear that kind of analysis, that is because the employers will not share their revenues, I immediately think of Karl Marx, and I thought that Karl Marx was dead long ago, and especially in Lithuania we want nothing to do with that kind of economic analysis. But I see it basically as Marxist economic analysis, and I don't really understand it. I think that it's a fact that if you look across countries where you have high income levels are countries where you're very productive. that is countries like the Scandinavian countries where labor productivity is very high. And if you look at it, it is completely correct that if you compare Lithuania to the Scandinavian countries, labor productivity is 4 times higher, maybe 4 times higher than in Lithuania. This is not because the Lithuanians are lazy or don't want to work. It's basically because to increase labor productivity, you need to do 2 things. You need to invest in capital, that's the machinery, IT, etc., and you need to invest in education. Obviously, if you have a lower what we call capital labor ratio, you will have lower productivity levels, and therefore you will have lower salaries. The only way to really enhance productivity and thereby make it possible for wages to increase is to have higher capital labor ratio, increase the amount of capital that you do via investment, increase investment into the country. That will increase productivity of laborers. So the big problem for the Lithuanian economy over the last 5-6 years was that we had a period where wages were growing, but there was no growth in productivity, and that's why we are in the present crisis. So don't tell me that we need to just increase wages, because then we might as well just say we want to increase unemployment. Then it will only be those who are already well off that will be in jobs. The people that will suffer is those with no skills, with low incomes already. They will suffer. So I think that, and I'm sorry to say, but I think this anti-entrepreneurial analysis sounds very Marxist.